There are only 20 known 200-inch net typicals in the world, according to Boone Crockett. Shooting a 200-inch deer is a rare feat in itself, let alone a net 200-inch typical with a bow from the ground on public land. You probably have a better chance of getting struck by lightning than doing that exact scenario, but there are exceptions to everything. This is the story of the Wayne Zaft Buck, a net 200-inch typical from Alberta, Canada, with a frame so stunning it seemed destined for world record status. But one controversial point, one ruling, and one decision later, it vanished from the record books entirely. The story starts on October 8, 2001, when Wayne Zaft, a seasoned bow hunter and national archery champion, slipped into one of his Alberta public land hotspots after his family Thanksgiving dinner. The rut was weeks away, but Wayne wanted to check a few funnels while he had some free time. He usually spent the later half of November guiding clients for an outfitter friend, so he had planned to hunt hard in the weeks leading up to the rut. Shortly after getting into the woods, Wayne was crouched down looking at a set of buck tracks in the mud when he picked up motion out of the corner of his eye and looked up to see this giant 200-inch monster coming his way. The buck was only about 100 yards away, trotting at a good pace, coming down the exact edge that Wayne was crouched down looking at the tracks. As the buck closed the distance, he passed behind some thick cover, and Wayne took this chance to move up 15 yards and get beside a broken-off poplar. In his article in North American Whitetail, Wayne stated,
"In front of me, I had a good opening for a shooting lane, one about 8 yards wide, out where I thought the buck would enter it. I estimated the distance to this point at 34 yards, well within my comfortable shooting range as an experienced 3D tournament shooter and bow hunter. As the deer entered my shooting lane, I drew in one fluid motion and then grunted with my voice to stop him. He gave no reaction, so I grunted again, this time somewhat louder. The buck slowed to a walk as he looked my way. However, he wasn't stopping, and my shooting window was closing quickly. I had to take the shot now to have a good chance of a clean kill."
As he watched the buck run off through the timber, the sinking feeling of, "Did I hit him back?" sunk in. Wayne thought the shot was a little high and a little far back, and the buck wasn't running like a deer that was fatally hit. As the giant disappeared, Wayne paced off the distance to where the buck was standing, coming up with just under 30 yards. He sat on a log for what I'm sure was the longest 40 minutes of his life before trying to find blood. He found the buck's tracks in the mud, but was only able to come up with a couple specks of blood. He spent the remaining half hour of daylight grid searching the area, hoping to pick the blood trail back up, with no luck. Defeated, he drove back home to his family, and after what I'm sure was a sleepless night, he was back in the woods before the sun even came up. He grid searched again for almost 2 hours, but had to leave for his shift at the mill. He continued searching after work with no luck, and headed home again after dark. It wasn't until he stopped and talked with a local farmer that everything would change. As luck would have it, the farmer told him of a dead buck laying out in one of his fields and agreed to take him to the carcass. As they walked up on the buck, he instantly knew it was his buck by the massive frame and the bits of velvet still hanging on. Unfortunately though, the coyotes found the buck first, and the rack was the only thing that Wayne could recover. Wayne was on cloud 9 after shooting a 200-inch net typical on the ground with a bow on public, a feat that I'm not sure has ever been accomplished before. But this is where the story again takes a turn. Wayne received an initial score of 208 and 6/8" net, and after the mandatory 60-day drying period, the buck officially scored 222 and 6/8" gross, netting a whopping 206 and 7/8 Pope and Young, enough to dethrone Mel Johnson's 204 and 4/8" world record bow killed typical and take the top spot for typical in the Pope and Young record books. The problem though was the left G3. The following spring, it was panel scored by Pope and Young, and it was ruled that the G3 was a non-typical point because it shared a common base. That single decision destroyed 14 inches on its own, and after deductions, the buck's new score dropped the whole way down to 172 and 5/8" net typical. Wayne obviously disagreed with the ruling and asked to withdraw the buck's score from the Pope and Young record books and never entered it into Boone Crockett either. He did, however, leave it in the Canadian record books, and it still sits as the #1 typical for Alberta at the original score of 208 and 6/8" net. Though it's not in the record books, many still argue it is the greatest bow killed typical ever. Buckmasters still recognizes it as a net 200-inch typical, scoring 205 and 7/8" BTR. Wayne Zaft's buck reminds us of the thin line between lost legacy and legend. 1 point, 1 ruling, 1 decision. What do you think? Deserving of a spot in the record books, or just quite not there? Let us know in the comments down below.